Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be painting on, or I guess you could say customizing because everyone seems to love to use that word lately, some playing cards with watercolors. Before we get into it, I'd just like to say this is by no means a tutorial. Most of the time I was just messing around and finding things that worked, so if you're a beginner like me, I don't guarantee the legitimacy of any of these techniques. This video is purely just for fun. So the first thing I did was I cut out 52 cards out of watercolor paper. I decided to make these mini to save on watercolor paper, watercolors, time, and detail because I was making these as a Christmas gift and I still have a lot of other gifts to get to. I believe the dimensions I used were 2 inches by 2.5 or maybe 3, I can't remember. Don't worry, I marked the paper before I started randomly drawing lines, it just looks more satisfying if I cut that part out of the video. Then I cut them out. They weren't all exactly the same size, which probably doesn't make them very fun to shuffle, besides the fact that they're mini and made out of thick watercolor paper, but I never promised that they were going to be functional, right? I wanted the cards to have a white border around them so that I would have space to write the numbers and draw the suits, so I picked some washi tapes from my collection to use as painter's tape. In some spots, when I tried to peel up the tape, it ripped the paper a bit, but it was still worth it because washi tapes. Then I began painting. I wanted to go with the nature theme, so I started with some cute little mushrooms. These 4 aren't the best in the deck, I like some of the lighter cards a bit better, but they work. It's kind of my instinct to put a ton of water on the brush, and then I'm too impatient to wait for things to dry, so things like this kept on happening. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to remove watercolor with a paper towel. Then it happened again. I went back and fixed that later to make sure it was completely dry. As you can see, I turned that mistake into the underside of the mushroom. Lastly, I painted a light blue background so that I would get the outline when I peeled back the tape. The next set of cards I made were lighthouses. Kind of a stretch from the nature theme, but I think they came out nicely nonetheless. It's kind of strange, but throughout almost all of these mini watercolor paintings, there was one I really loved, 2 that were okay, and 1 that was straight up terrible. I'll point out some examples later on. The next thing I painted was cactuses. I don't know why I didn't get much footage of these, but to make them pop a little bit more, I painted on some small pink flowers. Don't know why I didn't record that though. Yet again, another set I didn't record. You can see there how the tape ripped the paper a bit. This next set is silhouettes of some mountains. It was based off another watercolor painting I made a couple years ago. I think I followed a tutorial or used a reference image or something for that one. If I can find it again, I'll link it in the description. Speaking of references, I basically just googled watercolor blank and took bits and pieces from all the results that came up. I'm not that good at watercolors, so all these paintings really don't look like the references at all. Next, I painted some feathers that I really don't like. Not much to say about that, though I did put my paper towel to good use on this one. This is kind of a bad example because they're all bad, but what I was saying before about how, the top right is the best, top and bottom left are okay, and bottom right is just awful, you can really see that in this shot. I didn't add a background to this because I didn't want to mess it up even more. On a better note, the next ones I worked on were tree stumps, and I really like how these came out. This one on screen isn't the best out of the group, but none of them were particularly bad, so... Next, I painted some simple trees with a branch, nothing too special about them. On the next set of cards, I tried to paint a desert scene and failed miserably, so these were the only ones that I restarted on with a different idea. I have to say, removing watercolors is actually really easy with some water and a paper towel. That much color, and that little smudge of green, came out with only a slight pink tinge, which I just replicated on the other blank cards. I then decided to just keep it simple and paint on some flowers. I did get a bit impatient though, and the pink flower practically ate the purple one. Next set is pretty simple, just some cattails, but it's definitely one of my favorites out of the deck. Next we have one of my favorites, these acorns. It was kind of a rough start, but I managed to get them into something I really liked through the power of paper towels. My favorite detail by far, though, is the detailing on the acorn caps. Since it was, and I guess still is, the holiday season, I decided to paint some festive, wintry holly bushes. I really like how the purple background goes with the green shade of the bush. Lastly, I painted some pretty yellow flowers. Not sure if they're supposed to be dandelions or daffodils or some other yellow flower. Then I painted on the numbers and suits on each card. Since spades and clubs were more complicated shapes than hearts and diamonds, I used a black Posca marker for those instead. And with that, I was finished. I know this was a pretty low-key video in comparison to my last one, but I still hope you enjoyed it. I've got a couple more videos filmed, ready to be edited, so if you'd like to stick around for that, feel free to subscribe for more fuzzy sock plushies, crochet tutorials, sewing videos, and whatever else I feel like doing. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end of the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!